Thanks, Natalie. Lovely to be with everyone. So many lovely faces and lovely boxes. This is always a beautiful experience to be with you all. I am actually going to share a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, as Rabbi Mark said, the founder of the modern Hasidic movement. And really, what does that mean? It means he was really the beginning of the process of bringing Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, to the masses in a much more democratic way, really revealing a lot of things that had previously been the secret domain of elite groups of people who dressed in white robes and lived in caves or lived equivalently as a secluded spiritual ascetics. And the Baal Shem Tov brought that wisdom to, as I said, the masses, at least of our people, and then eventually to an even wider audience through his students. And he says something about our Torah reading this week, which is Chukat. Chukat is many different parts to our weekly Torah reading. It actually is incredibly eventful and exciting to read through. But the beginning is the red heifer, which is said by our rabbis to be the ultimate example of a mitzvah, a commandment or connection that we cannot understand. A supra-rational commandment, mitzvah that it just doesn't make sense, and it's not supposed to. So it's very ripe fodder. It's very fertile ground for the mystics, including the Baal Shem Tov, to provide us with deeper explanations which connect it to our inner experience. And he does so very beautifully. He says, and this is a teaching which he applies both to our journey through life, our whole life, from when we're kids to, when we leave this world in this form, but also applies every moment. There's a journey that he says we're all going on, both over the course of our whole lives and in every moment, which is the journey of working with ego, working with pride. And he says, it's like this. We start off, again, this is like the beginning of our lives, or you right now, or you in 5 minutes time, or you 5 minutes ago, or whenever it is. He says, we start off in a state of feeling so lowly in an unhealthy way that we don't think that we are able or worthy to connect, to have meaning, to have purpose, to have connection in our lives. And in the context of what he's talking about, he says, we don't think that we are good enough to do a mitzvah. As I said before, mitzvah is a commandment, it also means connection. So I don't think I'm good enough to connect with life, with the source of life, with the Ein Sof, with the Infinite One. Who am I? I just don't feel good enough. I don't give myself permission to have that meaning, that purpose, that connection in my life. So that's where everybody starts off at some point. Maybe you were there today, or will be, or tomorrow, or whatever. And then he says, we need the second stage. We need to grow to the second stage, which is we basically force ourselves or motivate ourselves somehow to do something good. And he says at first, the way it works is, if we're human beings, very few of us can motivate ourselves to do something good only for the best possible motivations, because we're human. So at first, the way it works is everybody needs some kind of motivation that is grounded in what I need right now. In the words of the rabbis in the Talmud, they say, mitoch lo lishma bar lishma. What that means is from doing something not for the highest, purest motivation. Lishma literally means for its own sake. So from doing something not for its own sake, eventually I come to do it for its own sake. So that's really the path of practice. We don't start off, again, this applies in our whole lifelong journey of practice, but also in every moment. We don't always start off with the purest motivations, right? We don't always start off thinking, I'm doing this for the good of all beings and the universe and da-da-da. Maybe some of you do, right? But then you're not starting off truly, right? The starting stage is we need a little bit of ego. We need a little bit of pride. But listen to what the Baal Shem Tov says that's so amazing. He says, that ego and that pride that we use to motivate ourselves to do the right thing, he says, as long as it is measured and directed and applied in a healthy way, he says it's actually not pride, it's actually humility. It's a very powerful, deep teaching. It really resonates with me so deeply, because we all have ego, we all need ego, we all have an ego self and pride and egotism. But if we can measure it, that first of all means we're in control of it, right? It's not taking us over. It's not the master. We are able to work with it. We are identifying it as something other than our core self. We're measuring it and we're directing it and we're letting it go in the direction that we choose to go in. We're not letting it direct us. We are letting it be fuel for the journey that we choose. We're using it. We're using it to go in the direction that we know deep down is good for us. So he says that kind of pride, that kind of ego is actually humility, right? Very beautiful, powerful teaching. And then he says, eventually, and again, this may happen to you right now or in 5 minutes' time, or maybe when you're 120 years old, please God, in good health. He says that eventually we get to a stage where we actually don't need that pride anymore, that ego identification anymore. We can let go of it a little bit. We can loosen a little bit, and we can recognize the I, the me that I so often identify with is really just one manifestation of the universe, of the Ein Sof, of life that is happening. It was happening before I was born. It's going to carry on after I'm here. So I'm just one way that shows up. And I'm not doing it, right? It's coming through me. So we can loosen up the ego identification enough to recognize it's not really me doing this, right? The I and the me are just constructs. So those are the stages. And how does it connect to the red heifer? He connects it back by saying the word for cow, heifer is a cow, in Hebrew is para, and para means increase, grow, multiply. And he points out that the ashes of the red heifer have this very strange property whereby if somebody is impure, they make them pure. Right. That sounds wonderful, right? If you're far away from God, the ashes of the red heifer will bring you closer to God. They'll make you pure, and you can be closer to God. But he says, the mystery is if somebody is already pure and they're working on the service in the temple involving the ashes of the red heifer, they become impure. This is the mystery. Why does it take somebody who is already pure and make them impure? The Baal Shem Tov says it's about pride. Because pride, if we're far away, remember the first stage where I feel like I'm not worthy enough to serve God? If I'm far away, I need pride. Pride will bring me closer to God. Pride will purify me. But if I'm actually in a state of connection and service where my work is to let go of my ego identification, to loosen up egotistical pride, and to remember it's not really me doing this, then the ashes of the red heifer, the pride, is actually taking me away from that. So it depends where I am in the service. He's asking us, the teaching is really asking us to pay attention to where we are in the journey. And it's a practice instruction, as many of his teachings are, for the cushion, for meditation practice, but also for life. So I'm going to practice, and I'm going to ask us to pay attention to the thoughts and other sensations that may arise, which involve an I and a me. I'm going to ask us just to notice what's going on with that. Am I telling myself I'm not good enough to do this, or that I'm so great? Or am I telling myself some other story about my connection with this practice or this moment or my life? And just to notice where we are in that journey of feeling like we're not worthy enough, and then hopefully using some pride in a healthy way to show up and do the thing we do want to do. And then maybe being able to even loosen up that ego identification, that pride, to get to a place of humility and what the Hasidim call bittul, of letting go of ego identification. And noticing it's just happening even without this ego self. It's just happening through me. So let's practice. Let's bring our attention inside. Find a posture that is comfortable for us. See if we can find a balance between relaxation and alertness. Will support us for this practice. I'm going to suggest that we start with an anchor. It's an object that we can bring our attention to, that's safe and supportive for us. If you have one that you use regularly that works for you, that's great. And if you're not sure what to use, I would suggest finding a safe place in your body a neutral place in the body. And if that's not available for you, could be something that you can experience with any of your senses. So, for example, something that you hear, the sounds that you can hear. Our work, our exercise is going to be let our attention settle by being as close to our anchor as possible, noticing what's going on there, moment by moment. And of course, our attention is bound to wander, which is absolutely fine and good and part of the practice. And when it does, we want to bring it back with compassion. And throughout this process of trying to notice what's going on in my anchor, and trying to notice what's going on generally in me, and keep bringing my attention back there. See if I can notice with compassion and with lightness, with humor even. What is my self-talk about myself? What thoughts, what information is arising, maybe feelings too, what stories about the I, the me. There's no need to change it. Just by noticing it compassionately, we're doing amazing work. And we can come back to our safe anchor when we're ready to, when we need to, start over and over. Let's sit in silence now, grounding with the anchor. And let's gently bring this round of practice to a close. Thank you, everyone, for your practice. And I'll hand it back to Rabbi Mark. Thank you, Rabbi Mark.
So much gratitude to you, Rabbi Daniel, for guiding us so beautifully today. And we seal our practice as we do each day by offering those of you who are in mourning or observing a yard site, or if it's your custom to join in the Kaddish, to do so. And if you're not, we ask that you stay present to offer your compassionate support for those who are reciting Kaddish. Thanks to Natalie for sharing the words of the Mourner's Kaddish on the screen. If you'd like to share the name or names of those you're remembering and honoring today in the chat, you can do that now, or you can do it after we recite Kaddish. And if you are joining me, please rise in body or in spirit, and you can unmute at this time. Yitgadal, Yitkadash,
Yitkadash,
Yilma, Yitayefon, Utayed, Chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala, Bizman Karev, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba, Le'olam, Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yitpa'ar, Yitmam, Yitnaseh, Yitadar, Yitalev, Yithalal, Shemed, Yitchakar, Ye'ela, B'kol Birchata V'Shirata, Kata V'Nechemata, Amiran Ba'alma, Imru, Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Mishai, Chai Yechaneinu, V'Kol Yisrael V'Imru, V'Ses Shalom B'Mamav, V'Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, V'Kol Yisrael, V'Kol Yoshvei Israel, Amen.
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 Friends, thanks so much for joining us today. As always, want to thank our teacher, Rabbi Daniel Raphael Silverstein of Applied Jewish Spirituality. Always a privilege and a pleasure for us to sit with you, Rabbi Daniel. And thanks to Natalie Rushinoff for holding our tech space today, our tech Mishkan, with skill and grace as always. And most of all, thanks to each of you for being here. If you're leaving us now, we hope to join us tomorrow. Rabbi Genevieve Greinitz will be leading us in practice at our usual time, 12:30 Eastern. On Friday, I'll be here to help us sit together into Shabbat at our usual time as well. Or you're welcome to stay on, use the next 15 minutes or so to stay with your practice if you like. You can turn the sound off your computer or device and just to continue to sit with that beautiful teaching and guidance from Rabbi Daniel, or join us for a conversation about the teaching and the practice, or to share reflections. As always, if you have a question you'd like to ask, please put it in the chat and preface it by writing question, all in caps, and it will make it a little bit easier for me to keep an eye on that. So let's bring you in, Daniel. Thank you so much. Beautiful teaching, a really powerful teaching. And I'm going to keep an eye on the chat when I want to begin with this question for you, which is that, of course, meditation and mindfulness, I think we can probably agree, can be understood as a spiritual practice, but it's also offered in a secular setting too, right? You know, it's a stress reduction, etc. But we're offering it here as a spiritual practice. And it seems to me that the teaching that you offered from the Baal Shem Tov and through your own teaching kind of comes close to, for me at least, what makes this a spiritual practice, in the sense that, as you were teaching, that we are bringing attention to our sense of self, our identity, our ego, in some sense for the purpose of moving beyond that, of understanding it as part of something larger than ourselves. I mean, I think that maybe one good definition of spirituality is the experience of understanding oneself, experiencing oneself as part of something beyond one's self. But as you pointed out, we got to start with the self, right? And you also pointed out really beautifully from the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov that focusing on ourself or having a sense of self is not necessarily excessive pride or egotism or self-centeredness, but actually can be a manifestation of anava, of humility, right? As long as it's in proper proportion, right? So here's the question. That's a build up to the question, which has to do with as we sit here together, and many people here have been sitting here for a very long time together, which is really wonderful, which is what suggestions would you have for noticing as we're sitting, noticing our awareness of the self, of the ego? Like I can notice that, oh, I am in my stories. Oh, I'm aware of my body. Oh, I'm aware of Mark's distinctive, separate self. And to move from that to um, to an awareness that actually I'm not separate and that actually I'm part of something greater than myself. So I want to start with that. I actually have a little bit of an answer to my own question, but I'll save it. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. In other words, you mentioned the concept of bitul, of negation of the self, and in some within Jewish mysticism and in most religious traditions, there is that sense of the point of it is to escape the self, right? Um, and as you point out, that's not necessarily the case in Jewish mysticism. The point is not just to escape the self. So, but how do we move from the self to the beyond the self? Or as you pointed out from that passage, to go from lo lishma to lishma, from not for its own sake to for its own sake, for the sake of something greater.
Thanks, Rabbi.
All in 20. How do we do that in 20 minutes?
The good news is you can do it in a moment if we prepare ourselves. I think in this teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, the language he uses is to realize it's not us that's doing this. It's not us that's in control. That something is happening through us. Life is manifesting through me right now. It was happening before I was born. It will carry on after I'm here in this world. I mentioned this in the instructions, but to really appreciate that, the Baal Shem Tov suggests, not in this exact teaching, but in other places, he talks about the importance of humor to expand our consciousness. I really feel that for me, that really helps me get a healthy perspective. Because, I mean, to put it in very kind of like theistic language, like God-centered language, if humor exists, I guess God must have made it, right? Which means like it has a place in our practice somehow. And, to put it just in, in more like neutral language, psychological language, I guess, if humans have a capacity for humor and a need for humor, I guess, again, it has like a healthy place in our journey of self-discovery and growth. So the Baal Shem Tov says in many places, and his students flesh it out and have stories about it, that we really need to laugh at ourselves. It's a really healthy, great part of the practice to notice like, oh, for example, I'm really uptight right now about that thing. Or like I'm really attached to so-and-so. Okay, not to mock ourselves or scorn ourselves, God forbid, not to put ourselves down, not to diminish how hard it is to be a person. It's a very compassionate humor. It's hard to be a human being. But within that, we're hilarious, right? We have what we call mushagas, right? We have madnesses, right? We have crazy attachments to things and obsessions about, like, we develop ideas about the way things should be according to nothing in particular, according to what we got comfortable with. So it's very, very important. And that really helps us loosen up our attachment to the ego identity and helps us remember, oh yeah, like, today I think it's all about so-and-so, or I'm so caught up in XYZ. But like, let's be honest, like a few days ago, a few months ago, a few years ago, a few decades ago, I was very different, and I'll probably be different, 5 minutes from now. So, but what's the big deal?
I love that. And it's as you're saying that, I'm thinking about the way humor creates this detachment, right? Of not taking ourselves so overly seriously, which is, I love that. It's part of the process. And of course, may explain a lot to do with Jewish humor, Black humor, dark humor, when we're in that place, which leads me to my second question, It seems to me that when we feel threatened, as many of us do these days, whether in Israel or outside Israel, that there is kind of propensity to our hold on our ego can get tighter when we're in an alert state. So I think this is an especially important teaching in times like this. But how would you suggest that we compensate for that, or like take that into account when we're feeling, whether it's anti-Semitism or the war or whatever is going on, like the list goes on, of course, threatened. How do we account for that? And it feels even harder to release our grip on the ego or the self in times like this.
I was once in a position where my mind knew that I was okay, but my body was sure that I wasn't, and my heart was absolutely pounding. And if I would have listened to my body, I would have ran away screaming, and that actually would have done me more harm. But because I knew in some place in me that wasn't the case, I was able just to watch that happen and just watch it. I mean, it was like a really powerful opportunity to practice. And that is the practice. It's not to change what's going on, right? It's just to notice it. So if people feel a heightened sense of danger and they feel like that within their body, something is aroused within their body in doing that, part of me wants to say to that, like, good, well done. You're healthy human beings. You have healthy threat detection and healthy threat response. That's great. But the question is then, what do we do with it? I think as long as we're practicing awareness of it, then we're also practicing discernment about what we do with it. Like, just because I feel a certain way, it doesn't have to take me over, take the steering wheel of my decisions, choose what I say next, choose what I do next, right? If I am practicing regularly, then I can look at it and say, how hard that is. Let me feel that with compassion. Let me hold that with compassion. And let me notice what's going on and bring in humor if and when it's relevant too, that may or may not be in that exact situation. And then decide what to do with it in the most skillful way possible. So we really have to feel these things deeply. We can't deny them, try to suppress them in any way, but that doesn't mean they have to be in charge of us.
And I love that in this teaching that you're holding up, that when we are in ourselves, for lack of a better phrase, and we might be inclined to judge ourselves for that, think like, I'm failing at this because I'm focusing on my own worries or anxieties or my body. That isn't necessarily the case, as long as we're aware that we're aware of that in the moment, which leads to Lori's question, I think, a little bit. Would you please share your thoughts on how we might use the sense of, quote, effort, that is trying, self-willing, even trying to control, as a gauge or measure for where we are vis-a-vis the ego or the self, right? Like I'm trying, I'm aware that I'm trying to let go of the ego. I'm trying to like transcend myself here, right?
Yeah, that really hits the nail on the head of what this teaching is about, actually, doesn't it? Because it's about how do we motivate ourselves, that we all need to give ourselves a little push from a place of some kind of ego identification. But I think what I want to say to the question is the dissolving of attachment to the ego self isn't a striving, it's a letting go. So by definition, we reach a point where I guess we feel safe enough. I guess that's what it is, right? We when we feel calm enough and safe enough, then that part of us, which is, let's say, like the reason I meditate is because like every time I meditate, I get candy or whatever it is, right? Or or I get people saying, "Well done, you meditated," or whatever it is, right? But like eventually I meditate enough and I don't need that anymore because I get to a point where I'm just like, lishma, this experience in itself is enough. I don't need the candy or anything else. So I feel safe enough and okay enough just to be with that. And then that part of me that I was using to motivate myself in a little bit of an egotistical or prideful way to like do something for some external reason can just gently relax a little bit, even if it's just for a moment.
It's beautiful. I think I remember the phrase effortless effort or something like that as a kind of a shorthand for it. It sounds like what you're describing. that we transition from, there is effort and intention involved, right? But eventually moving towards that softening, Susan writes, softening. Yeah. And it's helpful to have this, at least the 10 minutes of silence that you gave us, right? To move through that, starting with awareness of the anchor. I want to invite you, as always, to share a wrap. I just want to throw in, we don't have too much time, so I'm just going to try to do it quickly. When I think about the self, and I notice that I'm in the self, sometimes I make use of this teaching that I learned that myself is a manifestation of the self of the universe. That is that, that there is the divine in my body, in my emotions, in my mind, in my neshama, my soul, and that I am this manifestation of that larger self, as is everyone else, of course. And that really works for me as a way of, it's back to that kind of ocean metaphor of being a wave that arises from an ocean that is going to subside back into it, but is always part of it in some way. That captures that paradox. I think, just throwing in the other thing, that, the first word of the Aseret HaDibrot, of the 10 Commandments that God says, is Anochi, right? I am, Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, your God. And the first words of Moses in response at the burning bush is Mi Anochi, who am I, right? And it's just like a beautiful thing that always is striking to me, that Moses doesn't know that at the time, but he's kind of asking that question, like, who is Anochi? And God provides the answer at the Aseret HaDibrot. Oh, it's me. I'm the Anochi of the universe. But your Anochi is part of it, So thank you as always, for being generous to offer us a wrap to close out, Rabbi Daniel. I'm going to get out of the way here.
Thank you for that beautiful teaching, Rabbi Mark. Okay, here is a wrap recently. We only learn who we are through adversity. Me in the moment versus me in eternity. Sometimes we seem not the same externally. Look a bit deeper and taste with certainty. Something more than the 36 trillion cells in my body is making me living, moving my limbs with the gift of cognition, giving me meaning like scriptures being written inside me. Life has a knack to surprise me. Time after time, there's no knowing what might be. I'm in a groove, think I'm set. Life reminds me, we cannot guess or control. We're so tiny, highly unlikely, and so paradoxical. I am the lowest, and also on top of it all, I am the gutter, the sewer, the anguish. I am the love that is too much for language. That's it. Thank you, Rabbi Mark. Thank you, Natalie. Thanks, everyone.
So much gratitude to you, Rabbi Daniel. Thank you so much. Great to see you. Of course, as always, we send lots of love to you, your family, and to our family in Eretz Yisrael. Wonderful to connect with you in that way. Thanks to Natalie and to each of you for being here. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow with Rabbi Genevieve Greinitz. Be well and safe, everyone.